Hey everybody, I'm Emily, one of the designers with the Quilted Cow, and today I'm super excited to show you how to make this Bonnie bag holder. We're going to be learning French seams, so hang on to your hats. First though, I'd like to thank our sponsors. We are sponsored by Husqvarna Viking Machines, Creative Grids, Cutters, Mats and Rulers, and Wilmington Prints Fabrics. So let's get started. All right, so the first thing that you're going to do is head on over to our website if you haven't already and grab yourself a Bonnie bag holder kit. These kits are wonderful. They're going to either include one fabric for the main part on the outside, or there's going to be some piecing that you get to put together. This one happens to be just one border print fabric. It's great. Now the kit does include all of the fabric and the elastic that you need to make the Bonnie bag holder, but the pattern is sold separately, so make sure you grab the pattern while you're there. Let's go ahead and start with our handles. That's the first thing that we're going to do. Once you get your fabrics all cut out according to the pattern, you're going to make your handle. In order to make your handle, you've got this strip of fabric. You're going to fold it in half and you're going to press it in half just like that. Wrong sides together, long edges meeting. Once you've got that pressed, that line pressed, you're going to open it back up and you're going to press each of the long edges, the raw edges, in towards the middle. Get those pressed. And then you're going to fold it in half again and give it a really good press to make it nice and flat. And then we're going to top stitch all the way down both ends, both sides of this handle to close that handle up and also give it a nice, really nice finished look to it. So whenever I top stitch, I always top stitch 1/8 of an inch from the edge of whatever I'm top stitching on. If you want to go a little bit bigger, that's up to you, but for handles especially, 1/8 inch is just perfect. Okay, so we're going to line ourselves up with the 1/8 inch line, and it's a race to the end. So while I'm doing this, I just want you to know that all I'm doing is I'm holding my fingers down and kind of holding the fabric where it needs to go. So then I can just make my machine just zoom as I'm going along. Makes it so much easier all the way to the end. And then just flip this around and top stitch the other side. Easy peasy. Okay, so now you can take a moment and trim off those extra threads, but really they're going to be in the seam allowance, so they're not going to matter too much. But it looks like I've got one hanging a little bit low here. So take care of that. And then the next thing we're going to do is we are going to take our bag holder outside. Now, this is a directional fabric, so keep that in mind that whenever you are positioning your handle, you're going to be working on the top of the directional fabric or your pieced pieces, depending on what you've done or what you're doing. So let's make sure that we have the top of the fabric, and then we're going to measure, let's see here, placing the handle 2 inches from the upper left corner, and it's going to face down, and then you're going to put 3.5 inches in between each end here. So it's going to be offset. It's not going to be centered on the bag. We just want to work with this 2 inches. So I've got 2 inches facing down here. And then 3.5 inches in between. So 1, 2, 3. And so this one on this side ends on like 1/4 inch from the end, or from the inch mark, and 1/4 inch from the inch mark. So I've got 3.5 inches. And I'm going to put a clip just to hold that in spot. And we're going to base the handle to the top of the bag. So I'm just going to go and do about 1/8 inch in from the edge and put a little stitch here, just basting this. So it's going to get covered by your 1/4 inch seam allowance or by your seam allowance later on. You just want to hold it in place for now. All right, so now we've got our handle put on. Like I said, this is off center. It's not going to be centered on your bag, so don't stress about that too much. And now we're going to put the lining on top. We're going to put them right sides together. So we've got our right side facing up of our outside, and then the lining is going to be right side facing down or wrong side up. And we're just going to line it up These two are cut at the same exact size, so it makes it easy to just line it up the way you need it. Give it a couple of clips. And then to save myself some time later, I'm going to line up the bottom edge the way I need it to, and I'm going to sew this into a tube basically. So grab a couple of clips, and we're going to do some little bit of a weird seam allowance. So the top seam allowance, we're going to sew 1 inch from the top edge, and the bottom, we're going to sew 3/4 of an inch from the bottom edge. Just trust me on this, it'll all work out. But we're going to start with the top, which is where the handles are sewn on, 1 inch from that top edge. Now you do want to make sure that your handles are straight down from where you sewed them on, so they don't get too crooked in that 1 inch. Just feeling to make sure everything's still in the right spot. All right, and now we're going to sew 3/4 of an inch from the bottom edge. And you'll notice that I've left my clips on. That's just because I don't have to worry about the presser foot running into them. So I'm just going to leave the clips on and sew. All right, get the clips gone, and then we're going to press this open. So let's go ahead and turn this right side out. And like I said, we've made a tube with all the fabric connected at the top and the bottom. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to press this in order to get a good press. I do like to grab like a teal thingy or a point turner or something and just kind of push that seam flat here. So you might need to take a moment to just kind of manipulate the seam, make sure that you've got it pretty even, and that seam is just at the bottom. I found this to be kind of easy. If you wanted to, you could always put your iron inside and press that seam go in one direction, and that might make it a little bit easier whenever it comes time to flatten it out. So now this top seam, if you wanted to, you could always add a little top stitch to the top one, but you don't have to at all. It stays really flat on its own. But now we're going to make the casing for the elastic around the bottom, because we do need a little bit of elastic to keep those bags in place. You could also use this for cleaning towels, things like that, if you don't have a whole lot of plastic bags. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sew 1 inch up from this. I'm going to top stitch 1 inch here to make the casing for the elastic. Take that to the machine. Find my 1 inch mark. So now we're going to add our elastic. And now the easiest way I found to add the elastic on this one is to go ahead and grab a safety pin and pin to one end and guide it through to the other. But go ahead and clip the other end so that it doesn't go all the way through the casing. Because you want to have both ends available on the bottom of this bag. So I'm just going to guide this through, and I'm really just guiding it through on one side of the seam allowance that's in there. And then for this last little bit, I am going to clip the elastic, have about a 1/2 inch showing, and I'm going to clip the elastic to the edge of the casing here so that it doesn't go, I'm not sliding it all the way through the casing. That would be counterproductive. So let's go ahead and do that. and then gather the fabric as we go along now. All right, so once we've got that led all the way through, I've still got it clipped to the end here. I've got about a 1/2 inch hanging out, and then I'm going to remove my pin, and I'm going to clip this about a 1/2 inch of the elastic hanging out here, and now I'm going to stitch, just top stitch right along that edge. Just make sure you keep a hold of that elastic, otherwise you're going to be putting it back through that casing again later or in a moment. All right. So I'm going to sew down and then just give it a little back stitch just to make sure it holds. And do the same thing with the other side. So I found that if you smooth out the fabric so that it's bunched up on the other end of the elastic, it's a lot easier to have a nice flat edge that you're sewing on either side. All right, so now we've got our elastic sewn in for the bottom of the bag. Now it's time to do a French seam. So if you've never done a French seam before, basically what happens is that your raw edges end up getting completely enclosed in the seam allowance so that you never see a raw edge whenever you've got this done. So what we're going to do first is we're going to fold the bag in half lengthwise with the wrong sides together. Now, constantly in quilting, we're always about right sides together. This time it's wrong sides together. So get that. Wrong sides together here. And I'm going to give it a little bit of a clip just to make sure that I have everything it's going to stay lined up as I go along. You can use pins if you don't have clips, that's just fine. I've said before, I tend to stick myself with the pins, so I choose to use the clips. And you're just going to line it up just like this. And you're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down this edge. Now, when you get down to the elastic, it does get a little bit weird, so you do have to make sure that you hang on to things and lead it in, okay? It'll be okay. Don't worry, it stretches and you'll be fine. So wrong sides together, 1/4 inch seam all the way down that one long edge. And whenever I do this, I do like to give it a little bit of a back stitch at the beginning. So I start down a little bit and then just give it a little back stitch just to make sure everything is held in place. So like I said, at the very end here, you're just going to have to kind of smooth the elastic area out and take your time with it. And grab hold of those 2 elastic ends that you just sewed, and that'll make it a little bit easier as well. Give it a little back stitch. So now we need to get rid of part of that seam that we just put on. We only want about an 1/8 inch seam allowance whenever we finish this, or whenever we do the next part of the French seam. I am going to go ahead and trim this with my scissors. Usually I would use a ruler, line up the ruler, but with the elastic it doesn't really line up very well. So I'm going to eyeball an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Get rid of those extra pieces of elastic. Make sure that you're not cutting through your seam allowance that you just did. Luckily, this is all getting hidden, so it does not have to be a perfect 1/8 inch. Nobody's going to be able to come along and measure what you did. Which is my favorite part about quilting, is the seams get hidden. All those little spots go away. Let me get that thread out of the way. You do want to make sure that you leave kind of a nice clean edge. You don't have a whole lot of thread sticking out, because if you're not careful, whenever you go to make your French seam, they will start poking out on the other side. So once I've got all that trimmed, let me get this trimmed off. I've got a nice clean edge here that I'm working with. I'm going to turn this wrong side out. So now we've got the right sides together like we usually do with quilting. And it looks like I have a couple threads on the outside. All right. So I'm just going to kind of roll that seam so that it's at the very edge here. Give it a little press so that whenever I'm sewing down along it, everything will be pretty flat. So now I'm going to sew a 1/4 of an inch, or actually Honestly, it's a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch. What I want to do is make sure that my seam encloses completely the raw edges that I have here, that 1/8 inch seam, the raw edges. So if it's a little over 1/4 of an inch, that's okay too. And go ahead and start down a little bit, backstitch to the top, and that will actually hide your extra thread tails. So that'll help you get rid of those thread tails and they won't show on the end of your bag. Okay, so when you get down to where the elastic is, you may end up having to sew a little bit bigger of a seam allowance. Nobody's going to notice that with the elastic being so bunched up. But just try to flatten it out as best you can and let it go underneath that foot. Give it a back stitch so it holds really well. All right. So now I'm just going to trim off these extra threads at the beginning and end. And then our Bonnie bag holder will just about be finished. I do like to go back in and double check on, once I've got it turned right side out, that I don't have any extra threads that are hanging out the seam. Sometimes it doesn't matter how careful you are with that, with getting rid of all your extra threads, you're still going to get some on that seam. So let's turn it right side out. Make sure we don't have any extra threads hanging out. And we now have a finished Bonnie bag holder. Quick and easy project to put together in just a matter of about an hour, really. So go to the website, grab yourself your kit, get the pattern, make sure that you do get the pattern. It is sold separate, but the kit has all the fabric and the elastic that you need in order to make one of these. Grab yourself the kit from the website. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our videos, and thank you so much for watching.
Okay, you wicked cool quilters, good job. You made it to the end. We would like to thank our sponsors, Husqvarna Viking Sewing Machines, Creative Grids, rulers, rotary cutters, and mats, and Wilmington Prints for the beautiful fabrics. Thanks for watching.